This is a special report from 6 News. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Gene Patterson.
And I'm Lori Tucker. We are interrupting your regular programming to bring you news of the death of former U.S. Senator Howard Baker, Jr. He has died apparently from complications of a stroke, according to his aide, at the age of 88.
You're looking at video from February of 2012. We talked with Senator Baker at that time about a number of things, including one of the anniversary dates of the Watergate hearings. He, of course, was the minority head of that committee.
And, you know, he will probably always be known for framing that central question of the Watergate scandal. What did the president know, and when did he know it?
Yeah, it was a terrific question, and it certainly led to what ultimately led to the end of the Nixon presidency. We are waiting right now to hear from Senator Lamar Alexander. He's about to head to the podium right now. He is at the Airport Hilton.
Let's see if the microphones will work for you. What I will do, if it's all right with you, is make a little statement about Senator Baker. You give me a signal when you're all ready, and then I'll be glad to take any questions that you might have. So who? Okay. Howard Baker was Tennessee's favorite son. He was one of our finest national leaders, and for Honey and for me, he was an indispensable friend. Howard Baker literally built the two-party political system in Tennessee over the last half-century, and he inspired 3 generations of us to work to make this a better state and a better country. It's difficult to express how much we honor Howard Baker's life and how difficult it will be to miss him. Howard Baker had a lot of courage. He voted for civil rights and for the Panama Canal Treaty when it wasn't very popular. He was indispensable to Ronald Reagan's presidency. The presidency started off with Howard Baker passing the Reagan tax cuts and carrying him over to Tip O'Neill, and then it ended with Reagan's calling Howard to be chief of staff to help him get out of the Iran-Contra difficulties. Howard was the most persuasive man I ever knew. He was admired by both political parties. He was once named in a poll in the 1980s as the most admired senator by Democrats and by Republicans. And former Senator Dan Quayle once said, "There's Howard Baker, and then there's the rest of us senators." He was a pioneer. He stuck his neck out. I remember standing with him in this airport. I was wet behind the ears just out of law school, and I'd volunteered for his campaign for the Senate in 1966, and he boldly announced that he would win by 100,000 votes a week before the election, and I was embarrassed because it was such an outlandish prediction, and a week later it turned out to be true. No one has had more impact on my life outside my own family than Howard Baker. I met my wife Honey at a softball game when I was playing on the Howard Baker staff team, and she was playing on the team for Senator John Tower. So we honor his life. We'll miss him greatly, and he stands as a great example for all of us who are a part of public service. Any other question?
Sorry. Do you have any favorite anecdotes or memories of your time either working for him or working with him?
Well, one of my favorites is when he made his first address in the Senate. We call that the maiden address. And he spoke a little long. He spoke about an hour. And his father-in-law, Senator Everett Dirksen, who was the Republican leader, came over to him and said, and Howard said, "Well, Senator Dirksen, how did I do?" And Senator Dirksen said, "Howard, perhaps you should occasionally enjoy the luxury of an unexpressed thought." And another favorite story was after President Reagan swept into office in 1980, Republicans suddenly took over the Senate, and Howard found himself to be the majority leader, not the minority leader. And he went to see Senator Byrd of West Virginia and said, "Senator Byrd, I'll never learn the rules as well as you know them. I'll make a deal with you. I won't surprise you if you won't surprise me." And Byrd said, "Let me think about it." And then Byrd called him the next day and said, "Okay." And they worked that way for the whole time Howard was the leader and Byrd was the leader. What I especially remember is his generosity. I didn't appreciate it so much at the time that I was too young really to appreciate it. But looking back, I realize now how much he helped those of us who didn't deserve all that much help. I mean, Fred Thompson, me, Bill Frist, so many of us were inspired really to become Republicans and to be part of and help build a two-party system in Tennessee just because of Howard Baker's presence and his intelligence and his attractiveness. He was an enormously attractive political figure.
Is there a specific achievement that stands out from the rest that Howard Baker accomplished?
Well, in Tennessee, he'd probably point to the big South Fork Park, which he single-handedly created, a new national park up in the Upper Cumberlands. In legislation, the Reagan tax cuts, which he pushed through when he was the majority leader, were two things. People forget that he was also the ambassador to Japan for 4 years, and a very successful ambassador. Relations were never better between Japan and the United States than when both Senators Baker were there, because by that time he was married to Senator Casaubon, and she played a vital role as well.
Talk about Senator Baker's impact on Tennessee.
Well, his first impact was literally to build a two-party political system. I mean, when he started, Tennessee was 4-1 Democratic. Today it's 3-1 Republican. He opened the door and attracted lots of Democrats and independents into our party and helped it grow. That's one. Second, he inspired 3 generations, literally, of us to spend our time in public life, some of whom might not have done that. So Bob Corker, Fred Thompson, Bill Frist, so many, Don Sundquist, so many would give him credit for that, as I do as well. And then he was an engineer, so he understood Oak Ridge. He understood the Tennessee Valley Authority. He was very intelligent. And then there's one other thing I think was his impact. He always made us look good. You know, when you'd see Howard Baker on television, on a national television show, it made you a little prouder to be from Tennessee because he always conducted himself so well.
Given sort of the fraught partisan tension today in Washington, can you talk a little bit about the kind of work that Senator Baker did across the aisle, sort of the difference between politics then and now?
Sure. Do you mind if, Rick, do you mind? We're talking about Howard Baker. I don't,
yeah.
And of course you served with him. Why? This is Senator Santorum, who's in town. Come, if you don't mind, come on up with me, and I'll let you ask him questions in a minute. Go ahead. What was your?
Sort of the difference between how politics worked then when Senator Baker was in Washington and how it is now with the tension.
Well, it's never been as good as people say it was. You know, it's Rick served for several years in the Senate, and it's a rough and tumble place, and there's always lots of partisanship. But what Howard Baker was able to do was he respected everyone. He was fair. He would bring bills to the floor that had gone through committee, had bipartisan support, allow a lot of amendments, and then we get to a result. I think if Senator Reid would do that, we'd have a lot less partisanship in the Senate. Most of the complaint on our side is he won't let us have our say on behalf of the people of Tennessee. So if you have your say and you get beat, well, you get beat. But if you don't have your say, you feel like you're shortchanging the people who elected you. I think I've answered most of your questions. Senator Santorum's in town for a different event, and we were just going to have a cup of coffee, but he was in the Republican leadership in the Senate. He carried Tennessee in the last presidential Republican primary, and he served with Senator Baker in the United States Senate. So you might want to ask him his thoughts about Senator Baker.
Well, actually, I didn't serve in the Senate with him. I was in the House when he was there. So, well, yeah. But be happy to answer any questions. Obviously, it's a sad day. He's a legend, obviously, here in Tennessee. A huge force in the United States Senate. I think Lamar's right. Maybe it was a different time, but different leaders dictate the times. So when you have a leader that is willing to engage and have those debates and have the amendments and have both sides have a chance to air their points of view and try to come up with some sort of consensus, then you don't have the partisanship and acrimony. When you have a leader who's dead set against that, then you're going to have acrimony. And I think part of it, though, is the times we live in. I think there's a much more intense partisanship out there on both sides, and it makes it a lot harder to lead. But Howard set a very good example of how the Senate can function and work in a way that that produces results.
Talk about a national view of Senator Baker, because here in Tennessee we have our own view because he's from here, we know him, and stuff like that. But coming from Pennsylvania, right?
Correct.
Coming from Pennsylvania, what is kind of like a northeastern view of a senator from Tennessee? Well,
I think the word that probably would come to mind is that, he was a statesman. He was someone who was a strong, principled guy who was a consensus builder kind of leader. Now, that's not an easy thing to be these days, and very tough environment to be a consensus builder. But leaders rise to fit the times, and he rose at a very contentious time. I mean, people think it's contentious now, but Watergate was pretty contentious time. Republicans were sort of back on their heels, and he was able to lead out of that and result in some great successes in the 1980s with President Reagan. So he was a key and influential figure in that rise, and I think his legacy is tied with that.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rick. Very nice words. You got a minute?
Sure.
Thank you all for coming out on short notice. I hope I got on the plane when I heard it was dead.
All right, you've been listening to Senator Lamar Alexander and former Senator Rick Santorum as they spoke about Howard Baker there at the airport Hilton.
Some of the things you may not realize, Senator Baker graduated from UT Law School back in 1949, and then, of course, we had the Howard Baker Center here for Public Policy that was established in 2003.
Yeah, he also, he was vice chair of the Senate Watergate Committee. A lot has been made of that, but any of you who are old enough to remember the summer of 1973 during those Watergate hearings, and they captivated the nation, and certainly Howard Baker played a very prominent role in those hearings and what transpired with the end of the Nixon administration with his resignation.
He really helped shape that whole era, really. And as we mentioned, he died at his home in Huntsville, Tennessee at the age of 88 from complications of a stroke. You have been watching this on air and online on WATE.com. We'll have much more on our website, and of course our live coverage continues here on 6 News at 4.
We now return you back to programming.